So I'm 3 weeks into my experiment with the carnivore diet, and after 2 weeks that were relatively uneventful, week 3 has thrown me a couple of curveballs that I want to share with anybody that's considering starting the carnivore diet. I'm also going to share whether or not I plan on continuing to get out to that 4 weeks that I had planned on in the beginning. And lastly, I'll give another update to my weight loss progress to see whether or not I'm still losing or not. All of that and more coming up next. What's up everybody, Steve here, coming to you today with my week 3 update of my carnivore diet experiment. As always, if you've not watched any of the other videos in this series, I would encourage you to watch those first, but if not, I'm going to put a link down to the rest of the videos in the description, or you can click here if you want to catch up afterwards. So the last few weeks that I've been on the carnivore diet, I've been talking about the pros and cons, and by and large, they've stayed relatively the same. And this week started off very much the same. In fact, I thought that this was going to be another relatively uneventful update. But then Friday rolled around. My wife and I decided to take a date night together to one of the local theme parks, and after walking around for a while, I started to notice that my back started hurting, my knees started hurting, and frankly, I just started feeling like crap. And after thinking about it for a while, it finally hit me. I was inflamed. And I mean massively inflamed. I mean, it was to the point where I was even feeling more inflamed than I had been prior to starting keto. What made this such a big deal is that for those of you that have watched a few other videos in this particular series, you've heard me talk about numerous times about how low inflammation has been on this diet. In fact, it was one of my repeated pros that I talked about each week. So to all of a sudden be this inflamed after following this as strictly as I have, it came as a bit of a shock. So I came home, drank a bunch of water, laid down, went to bed, still feeling pretty crappy. The next few days, over the rest of the weekend, I felt generally inflamed, but not near as bad as I had on Friday. I just figured I needed a bunch of rest, and so that's what I did. Then I think I figured out what was going on. The first couple of weeks that I had started the carnivore diet experiment, I was eating a lot of really high quality meat products. And on top of that, I was also eating a big combination of fish and fatty chicken and other meats as well. But as most of you are aware, or at least of those of you that have tried to buy a bunch of good quality steaks here recently, that can get really, really expensive. And so after doing this for a couple of weeks, really, I couldn't afford to go out and just start buying this really, really expensive meat anymore. So I decided to just kind of get as much beef as I could, the stuff that I could afford, and that's what I put on my menu for the upcoming week. And on top of that, most of my meals for week 3 were steak in some form or fashion. Very little variety, very little fish, other things like that. It was primarily just that steak, and then the lower quality steak at that. And for those of you that don't know, lower quality meats tend to be much higher in omega-6 fatty acids, which is usually due to how the beef is raised and how it's fed. And just because beef says it's grass-fed doesn't mean that it's grass-finished. Oftentimes they finish the meat out with corn or grain or other things like that to fatten up the beef prior to them being processed. And all of these things increase their omega-6 fatty acid profile. So due to the fact that omega-6 can be highly inflammatory, as I look back over the last week and what I was eating, I'm pretty sure that that's exactly what I was experiencing. I know my body pretty well, and there was nothing else that I was doing differently that would have caused this. And I know this probably borders on too much information, but while I never had diarrhea or never technically got constipated, I will say that my stomach just felt pretty much off for the entire weekend. Honestly, I can just kind of describe it as feeling blah. So then what does that leave me? Well, I want to finish this 4-week experiment that I set out to do, but I know I'm going to have to make some big changes, and I'm going to have to make them pretty fast. Inflammation is not something that I mess around with, and it's not something that I'm willing to endure just simply to finish an experiment. Inflammation is so hard on the body, and it's not something that I'm willing to continue to endure. So I know that's something I'm really going to have to focus on to get under control. So this is technically the first day of week 4 for me, and so going forward, I'm going to really be focusing on upping my fish content, eggs, probably some fattier chickens in moderation, because even chicken can cause inflammation depending on the type of meat that you get. And yes, I'm probably still gonna have a little bit of pork and a little bit of beef, but I am gonna make sure that it's of a higher quality, and it's gonna be a lot less than what I did during week 3. I guess the biggest thing that I wanna accomplish with this particular video update is to kind of put out a little bit of a warning for any of you that might be considering trying the carnivore diet. I mean, look, it's been great as a weight loss plateau breaker, but it's something that I would highly encourage you to enter into cautiously. Every single person is different, and your reaction to it may be very different than mine, but it would also be highly irresponsible of me to not mention the bad parts of it along with the good as well. One thing that I always want you to know about me in this channel is that I'm always going to be honest and straightforward with you regardless of what I'm trying. Building that trust with you is super important to me. So be aware that I'm always going to talk about the good and the bad of whatever thing I'm trying, diet I'm trying, experiment that I'm trying, whatever it is, I'm going to always be honest with you. So just something to keep in mind if you are considering trying the carnivore diet, you really want to do your best to try to focus on much higher quality meats. If you can get grass-fed and grass-finished meat, that's the way to go. Yes, it's going to be more expensive, but that's definitely the way to go. You ought to also consider keeping in those fattier meats like salmon or mackerel or sardines, whatever those things are. You want to try to keep them in a lot as averse to just simply having a bunch of steak. I'm finding out the hard way they can be pretty hard on the system. Okay, so having said all of that, let's go ahead and move into my weight loss update. So in the midst of feeling pretty darn bad over the weekend, I still managed to lose 2.8 pounds, which brings my 3-week total to almost 12 pounds. And I'm super happy to continue losing weight on this way of eating, but I'm also doing a lot more to weigh out the benefits versus the cost. Like anything else, I really want to make sure that it's worth it in the long run. And since I've really only had a few days of issues and I'm making immediate changes to try to address those, I do plan on continuing at least out to week 4 of this experiment. I set out in the beginning to try to hit 4 weeks, and I really want to try hard to make it. And it's for more reasons than simply trying to lose a few more pounds. There's a lot of other barriers that I'm trying to break through for myself as well. For those of you that have struggled with weight loss for a long time, you pretty much know what I'm talking about. But as I said, if the inflammation continues and the changes that I make don't make any difference, I am willing to throw in the towel early. So if you want to make sure and kind of see how this experiment ends and my concluding thoughts and all that stuff on it, please consider subscribing to my channel. And if you do subscribe, please click on the little bell icon to turn on notifications. That'll make sure and let you know and notify you anytime I do put out new content, especially as I'm uploading more and more content around this series. And as always, please just consider destroying that like button for the YouTube algorithm. As you hear me say in probably every video, for those of you that make it this far, for a channel my size, which is really small, any like that you give, any share, any comment, those things really, really help to ensure that YouTube will see this and push it out to new audiences that may not necessarily see this content unless they're looking for it specifically. I want to thank you so much for your time, and I'm really hopeful that the next update that I have is going to have a lot more and better information. But until then, thank you again, and I'll see you next time.